All right. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. How's everybody doing? Welcome everybody to our session 23. Not that many people here today. Just before we get stuck into the chapter, want to address something that Hussein said last week. I want to finish the thought because I think it's in some way connected to at least the attribute that is connected to this chapter for the week. Hussein asked, in our discussion about, creation at each moment, Hussein asked, what then is permanent, right? And the answer to that, I gave an answer, but the short answer to that is that nothing is permanent in existence other than the real. That is the only totalizing permanency in existence because it is existence itself. So right here, we start to understand the meaning that Ibn Arabi gives to, at least, well, he didn't use the term, but this is what we now begin to understand by the meaning of Wahdat al-Wujud itself, the unicity of being, in that there is nothing, absolutely nothing that has permanent existence or any permanency, subutiyah, in any way, shape, or form, because everything comes into existence and then passes out of existence. So that which is the permanent is the wujud al-mutlaq itself, which is God, and everything else being just basically a derivative, or where wujud, where existence is concerned, is a derivative of that permanent existence. And so this is then segues now into at least the attribute of this week's chapter, which, by the way, is a chapter I don't like very much, just like the chapter of Lot, which I think, is pretty obvious as to the reason why, because of some of the things that Ibn Arabi says, especially about when he says in it that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not designate a successor. I think, as Shia, we can very much disagree with that. Anyway, let's get stuck into this chapter now. The wisdom of being, hikmat al-wujudiyah, in the word of David, fi kalimat al-tawudiyah. He says, know that since prophecy and apostleships are a special divine favor, there is no question of any acquisition of merit. I mean, particularly the legislative prophecy. His favors to them in this respect are pure gifts and not in any sense rewards for which any compensation will be asked of them. His bestowal on them being a matter of favor and selection. He says, and we gave to him Isaac and Jacob, meaning to Abraham, the friend. Of Job, he says, and we bestowed on him his people and with them their like. Of Moses, he says, and we gave him from our mercy his brother Aaron, a prophet, and other similar examples. They were invested from the beginning and in all or most of their states by his name, the bestower, al-Wahhab. He says of David, we gave to David of ourselves bounty, not linking it with any notion of a return to be demanded of him, nor is there any suggestion that it was granted as a reward or recompense. When God demands thanks, he demands it of the people, nor does he omit to mention David so that the people might thank him for what he has bestowed on David. In David's case, it is the granting of a favor and a boon, while in the case of his people, a return is required. As he said, give thanks, O people of David, for so few of my servants are thankful. If the prophets gave thanks to God for his favor and gifts to them, it was not something required of them by God, but something that came voluntarily from themselves, as when the apostle stood until his legs became swollen, giving thanks to God for forgiving him his early and later sins. When someone spoke to him on the matter, he said, shall I not be grateful? Shall I not be a grateful servant? God said of Noah, indeed, he was a grateful servant, albeit that few of God's servants are so. The first favor granted by God to David was that he gave him a name, not one of the letters of which is a connecting letter, by which he cut him off from the world and informed us about him by his name alone, the letters being Dal, Aleph, and Waw. He named Muhammad, on the other hand, with a name containing letters of connection and disconnection, by which he joined him to himself and separated him from the world. So combining in his name both states. He did the same for David, but inwardly, not in his name. This is what especially distinguishes Muhammad above David. I mean, the information concerning him by his name. In his case, it is complete in every respect, as in the name Ahmad, which is of God's wisdom. Concerning his favorite on David, he also mentions the turning back of the mountains and their exaltation. They exalted God because of his exaltation, so that their action might conform with his. Similarly, in the case of the birds, God granted him power and attributed it to him. He attributed it to Solomon, not to David. So just bear that in mind. He also granted him wisdom and the final say in affairs. Finally, the greatest favor and degree by which God singled him out was that he attributed the vicegerency specifically to him, which he did not do for any other human, although there were regents among them. He said, "O David, we have appointed you a vicegerent in the earth, so judge between men with truth and follow not caprice." Meaning anything other than my inspiration that comes to your mind in exercising your judgment, lest it cause you to err from the path of God. That is, the way revealed to the apostles. Then he admonishes him, saying, "For thou who stray from God's path will be a severe punishment, because they have forgotten the day of reckoning." He does not say, "If you stray from my way, you will be severely punished." Should it be pointed out that the vicegerency of Adam was also specified, we replied that it was not as specific as David's, since he said only, "I am going to put a vicegerent on the earth," not, "I'm going to make Adam a vicegerent in the earth." Even if he had said it, it is not the same as saying, "We made you a vicegerent," as the case of David. While the later statement is unambiguous, the former is not, since no former mention is made of Adam in what follows, to the effect that it is he who is the vicegerent specified by God. Therefore, consider carefully what God tells of his servants. Similarly, in the case of Abraham, the friend, he says, "I'm going to make you a leader, imam of men," not a vicegerent. It might be the case if he knew that leadership here means also vicegerency. Very interesting point, because imama and khilafa are with Ibn Arabi here now made synonymous, which is a very thorny controversy when we enter into the historical discussion about what happens at Saqifa, and then subsequently in the debates between Shiites and Sunnis about the khilafa and the imama. But here, the position that Ibn Arabi is taking is a very classic Shiite position on the question. It cannot be the same, however, because he does not specifically call it vicegerency or khalafa. A further specification of the vicegerency of David is that it is a vicegerency of judgment, or hukmiyah, which comes only from God when he said, "So judge between men with truth," whereas Adam's vicegerency was probably not of this rank. Adam's regency might have been based on the fact that he had succeeded whoever was there before, and not because he was God's representative to his creation with the divine power of judgment over them. What happened just here? Adam ceased to be the first man in this sentence by Ibn Arabi. If indeed he was, so be it, but we are here concerned only with what is clearly specified. God has in the earth representatives appointed by him, and they are the apostles. As for the vicegerency at the present time, it derives from the apostles and not from God directly, since they judge only by what the apostle has laid down for them and no more than that. There is, however, a subtle point which only people like ourselves grasp, that concerns the deriving of criteria for judgment directly from what was laid down for the apostle. The one who derives his vicegerency from the apostle arrives at his judgment from the tradition of the apostle or by his own effort, also inspired by that tradition, by the hadith meaning. Among us, however, are those who derive it directly from God, who are vicegerents appointed by God in the same way and whose criteria come to them in the same way as to the apostle himself. Just note what I said, that he begins a given paragraph in a very orthodox fashion, and as we proceed into it, he just begins to unpack and unravel this all. Such people appear to follow the apostle only because their judgment in no way contradicts him, as will be the case with Jesus when he will come down and judge, or as the case of the prophet in his saying, those are they whom God has guided, so follow their guidance. Such a person is special and worthy in what he realizes concerning the form of derivation, being in the same position as the apostle who confirmed the law of the apostles who preceded him. Thus, we follow him in his confirmation of them, not the law revealed to those before him. Thus, the derivation of judgment as vicegerent from God is the same as in the case of the apostle. Speaking esoterically, we would say of such a one that he is the vicegerent of God, and speaking exoterically, that is, he's a vicegerent of the apostle of God. The apostle died without appointing a successor, astaghfirullah min dhalik. That is not true, but anyway, because he knew that someone would later on receive the vicegerency from his Lord and become a vicegerent appointed by God directly, albeit in conformity with the revealed law. Therefore, when he knew that, he did not seek to prejudge the matter. God has vicegerents amongst his creatures who take from the store of the apostle and apostles what they have themselves taken. And they know the importance of the preceding apostle because an apostle is always open to new revelation. The vicegerent himself, however, is not open in this way as he would be were he an apostle. When he legislates, he propounds only such knowledge and judgments as conform to what the apostle was given. Thus, outwardly, he's a follower, not an equal like the other apostles. Consider how the Jews believed in and confirmed Jesus so long as they thought that he had brought no more than Moses, as in the case of the regency today in relation to the apostle. When, however, he enlarged on or abrogated the judgment established by Moses, Jesus being an apostle, they could not tolerate that, since he was contradicting their preconceptions about him. The Jews were ignorant of the truth of the matter and so demanded his execution, the story being told to us by God in his mighty book. Being an apostle, he was open to new revelation, either limiting an established judgment or adding to it, limitation being something added without doubt. The vicegerency today is not of this kind, since only rulings arrived at by personal judgment may be limited or added to, not the law promulgated on the lips of Muhammad. He's talking about ijtihad. Sometimes a regent might say something that appears to contradict some tradition on a judgment, and it might be imagined that this stems from personal judgment, while it does not. In such a case, the leader in question is not inwardly sure about the apostolic tradition, otherwise he would judge according to it. If indeed it is the sort of tradition that is transmitted by one honest man from another, such a one is not immune from fancy or notional transmission. Such things happen today to a vicegerent as they will happen also to Jesus. For when he comes again, he will abolish many established rulings based on personal judgments, clarifying thereby the truth revealed to Muhammad, and not least in the case of community leaders contradicting each other on a single revelation. We know, of course, that were a revelation to be sent on the matter, it would agree with one of the conflicting opinions, and he would be the divine, and that would be the divine judgment on the matter, all else being corroborative, if confirmed by the reality, so that this community might be relieved of stress and that God's judgment might be spread throughout it. As for the saying, if allegiance is paid to two caliphs, then kill the second. This applies only to the outer vicegerency, which wields the sword. Should have happened at the Saqifa. Indeed, even if the two caliphs agree together, one of them must be executed. This is not the case with the spiritual vicegerency, in which no killing is involved, such being applicable only to the outer form. The matter of killing the outer caliphate, which although it does not enjoy the status of the inner, nevertheless is representative of the apostle of God, if it be just, must be inspired by the imagined possibility of two gods. If there were in them gods apart from God, they would bring about corruption, even if they agreed together. However, we know that if for the sake of argument they disagreed, the ruling of one of them would be carried out, so that he would be the god other than the other. From this, one may deduce that every ruling carried into effect in the world today is the decision of God, since it is only God's decisions that have any effect in reality, even if it seems to go against the outer established ruling called the law. Very interesting point. So the outward law, once again, we meet with this, that the outward law conflicts with God's will in many cases. That is because everything that happens in the cosmos is according to the ruling of the divine will, the Mashiach, and not necessarily in accordance with the rulings of the established law, even though its very establishment derives from the divine will. Just a second. Okay. Its establishment was brought about in a particular way, the divine will being concerned with its confirmation by actualization, but not with guaranteeing its being acted on. The authority of the divine will is immense, so that Abu Talib and Makki in his Qut al-Qulub called it the throne of the essence, Arsh al-Dhat, since for itself it determines the effectiveness of the divine decision. Indeed, nothing occurs or fails to occur in existence without the divine will. When the divine command appears to be contradictory of what is called disobedience, it is because it is an indirect through the medium of prophets or angels command and not the existential command, amr takwini. So this is probably the crux of the argument that he is making in this passage, which I think kind of redeems the rest of the chapter, which for me is not all that great. But what he's basically saying is that all other forms of command, and especially where the law is concerned, are completely underneath and subservient to the existential command, the amr takwini, right? Which in essence, if you are reading carefully what Ibn Arabi is saying, makes in one very central aspect, the law, the Sharia, a complete tangential reality, historically and spatio-temporally located, where the real command of things in the universe is the Amr Takwini, which is the divine will in action, that is forever producing every conceivable thing that can possibly be imagined in its sameness, in its difference, opposition, union, the whole kit and caboodle. In the context of the command of the divine will, no one can ever oppose God in anything he does. That may happen only in the case of the indirect command, so understand. In truth, the will, the Mashiach, is concerned only to create the act itself and is not concerned with the agent. Thus, it would be absurd for it not to come into being. In particular instances, however, it may be seen as disobeying God's command, while in others it is regarded as conforming to his command, eliciting praise or blame, as the case may be. If then the matter is, as we have said, then all creatures come eventually to felicity, of whatever kind it may be. This is explained by the fact that the mercy embraces all things and takes precedence over his wrath, with that which proceeds going first. When something conditioned by the latter encounters it, the former then takes over and the mercy touches it, since no other has precedence. This then is the meaning of the saying that his mercy precedes his wrath, conditioning all that comes into contact with it, since it stands at the eventual goal toward which all are traveling. Coming to its inevitable, so that the attainment of mercy and the separation from wrath is also inevitable. And just remember what he said a couple of chapters ago, that wrath, is an accident. It's an arad. The mercy governs everything that encounters it, according as each thing's state dictates. That includes the wrath. So that mercy is the prime mudabbir, the prime governor of the wrath itself. Whoever understands is witness to what we say, but he who does not is assailed by anxiety. There is not but what we have mentioned, so trust, and be of our own state with respect to it. What we have experienced of it, we have rehearsed to you, and you have from us what we have given you. As for the softening of iron, it means that hardened hearts are softened by admonishment and warning, as iron is softened by fire. Difficulty refers to hearts harder than stone, stone being split and calcified, not softened by fire. I love this metallurgical symbolism he's using here. He softened the iron for him only so that he could work protective armor from it as a sign from God. In other words, something may be protected against only by itself, so that one is protected from spears, swords, and knives by armor. Thus is the dispensation of Muhammad. It is said, I seek refuge from you, in you. Audu bikaminka. So understand. Mr. Abrahamov incorrectly cites this as being a Quranic ayah when it's actually a hadith and a prayer, a dua. This then is the mystery of the softening of iron, and he is the avenger at-Qahhar, the merciful ar-Rahman, the giver of grace. This was the chapter of David. Like I said, the beginning of the chapter of this, it just drives me nuts whenever I read it. But once we get to the final third of it, where he starts to explain the difference between the Amr Takwini and the Amr Taklifi, is where things get extremely interesting. He's basically reiterating what he's already said previously about the mercy preceding the wrath, and that the wrath, wrath, divine anger, all of these things are derivative of the mercy itself. Anyway, I open the floor. Go for it. Anybody?
Okay, Saidi, I these are not some deep questions, but if for better understanding of the text on some place, if you can clarify the meaning. So the first one is the gift which Allah Ta'ala gave to David, which is a Solomon, and then says it is the same act, the same thing, it is gift to David, but it is not gift to others, the people of David, his progeny. And that which is pure gift to David, which does not require a gratefulness or thankfulness, in the same way, it is not gift for the people of David, which require thankfulness from them. If you can
Sure.
elaborate a little more.
The metaphysics is a little bit confused, but so the way I read this in this chapter is I go back to the narrative of David in the Bible, and just remember that David is a sinner, and that Solomon's progenitation comes as a result of sin, where David steals away the life of another man, Uriah the Hittite, his wife Bathsheba, and as a result of this, sometime later, David is born. The way I have looked at what Ibn Arabi is saying here, and what he's indicating here, is that, in my opinion, he must have been aware of this narrative, because what it appears that he's suggesting here is that Solomon is actually a redemption of David. The birth of Solomon, right, is actually a redemption of David for his act of sin, of breaking the commandment of against adultery, which is what happened here. So this is the way I look at it. And so that Solomon, as a gift to David, is not necessarily a hibbatullah in the same sense to the people of Israel as it is for David, in basically creating a blank slate from the sinful action that he took in first of all in his act of treachery against his own general Uriah the Hittite, and second in committing adultery with their and as a consequence of which sometime later Solomon was born. So that is the way I have read this particular passage, because when you go into the latter part of the chapter, and despite what the commentators like Resari and Jandi and even Koshani are saying, I don't see the connection to the next half of the last third of that chapter, where he gets into the divine will, and the difference between the Amra Taklifi and the Amra Takwini. Because, and if you want to put it that way, then the issue of the Taklif is something that raises a question about the way that Ibn Arabi is talking about the relation between David and Solomon here, because the text of the Quran doesn't clarify anything, doesn't mention anything to the same effect that the Bible does. I think it's the Book of Kings, or what is it, Judges? I can't remember which of these two the books of the Old Testament the story of David occurs in. But David, per the Bible, is a sinner, and his sin is also what then plants the seed of the destruction of that kingdom. Just briefly in a civil war after his death, and then after Solomon. It also leaves the earth. That eventually brings down the kingdom of Israel and is conquered by the Assyrians, etc. So that is the way I tend to read what Ibn Arabi just said here. So that we have to now then go into the biblical narrative about David and Solomon to understand what the illusion is really about, rather than the Quran. That's. I mean, people can disagree with that, but that's the way I have read this.
And because you mentioned it just a little bit further here, what is interesting to me that for the several children David has, exactly the one which was the result from adultery, it was the chosen one from God, which is very interesting, which shows how the uh, Allah Ta'ala, He can produce good result even from the bad action we are doing.
Exactly.
It can turn.
That's why I'm saying what I'm saying, particularly given the fact of what he says in the last third of the chapter, when he's juxtaposing Amr Taklifi and Amr Takwini. That's why I think that is put in there by him, because he's actually alluding to the biblical narrative, such that what you just said, that from a treacherous, sinful action born from craven lust of David for Bathsheba, that out of this unholy union, if you like, an act of treachery, God brings forth Solomon, the greatest prophet king that has ever been, right? And so then that then becomes also an sort of an absolution for David's infraction, for his failure to live by the taklif of God per the commandment, per the Mosaic law.
Okay. No, the next one. When Sheikh Muhyiddin here speaks about the Imamah and Khilafah, and according him, Khilafah is higher level than
Yeah,
the Imama. And just uh, how would you comment it? And a little note how I am, if I can give it some level of truth. Linguistically, a khilafah from a khalafa, that you stay behind something, and imama, you stay before in front of something.
yeah,
And here, when we speak about Khilafah, it is because, metaphorically speaking, God is in front of you, you're behind him. And
yes,
Imam, you're in front, the people are
back.
beside you.
Yeah.
And because the first is related to God, that is the reason, in some level, ontologically speaking, maybe this would be the reason Sheikh Muhyiddin is staying that this is higher
This
level.
is, yeah, it
But
is. He gets it. He gets it wrong, and at least one of the commentators, Qaisari, sort of starts to say that Ibn Arabi got this backwards. It is only in the epitome, Persian epitome of Qaisari's own commentary by Tajuddin Hussein Khawarazmi, where Khawarazmi outright says it, that this is just wrong, that the Sheikh got it wrong here, and he says exactly what you said. You know that the meaning of these words means particularly this, and the khalaf is something that stands in the back, and there whence we derive the word khalafa or khalif. So the Sheikh, misunderstood this. Basically got his argument backwards. So yeah, that's where I see it. But there is one thing that he says in one sentence that seems to me that he's kind of blinking at us, in a kind of an elusive sort of way, that he's doing this deliberately, because at the same time he is talking about the union of the imama and the khilafah as a single station in one sentence that he's talking about. And this is the classic Shiite point of departure about what the leadership even is. That the khilafah is the imama and the imama is the khilafah. It is just the outward and the inner dimension of the same thing, and that this can only be legitimately invested in a single person, which we believe are the Ahl Bayt, alayhim afsal salatu salam, but which the Sunnis and the Sunni schools of law and the theologians, even to this time, they're still struggling with trying to define the precedence and the subsequence of one over the other. So what Ibn Arabi seems to me to be doing here, if we read between the lines of what he's saying rather than what he's saying on the surface, what it seems to me like he's doing is he's basically, on the one hand, he's kind of laying out the classic arguments of these Sunni theological schools, and then by the same token, he's very elusively and in a very taqiyya kind of way, kind of saying, well, look at this, where the Khilafah and the Imama are joined. He says this in one sentence, which in my opinion is basically a bow to Shia, even though then he says that the Prophet didn't appoint a successor, which is, from our point of view, is just complete wrong. Come on, how can you even say that? So this is the way I look at it. So this particular element of that chapter, in my opinion, should not be taken at face value. And then when we get into the outright Shiite commentators of the Fusus, beginning with Sayyid Haydar al-Muli, all the way to, I would say, recently with Hassan Zada al-Muli, they really stickle this, and they bring all of these various arguments that you just mentioned out one by one by one by one, in their commentary on this particular part of the chapter of David. And so, I mean, Amelie just like rips Ibn Arabi for this particular this thing he says in the beginning of his commentary. Is Nasal Nusus, which is just the intro to the Fusus al-Hikam, because we don't have the rest of his commentary. And on it goes until we get to the present time with people like Hassan Zadamuni.
because what he says in the end, toward the second part of the chapter, then if you have two Khilafah, kill the second.
Yeah,
In full measure, it applies to Imam. You cannot have two.
That's the thing, isn't it? That is the thing. What is Ibn Arabi doing with us here? What is he doing? He's messing with our heads. Yes. Because what this seems to suggest is that Ibn Arabi is in very subtle form even refuting the arguments of those at the Sarifa, right, who were insisting that it doesn't, that this leadership of the Ummah doesn't need to be in the hands of someone sanctified from the Prophet Muhammad, that we need a leader who's just a Muslim, right? Whereas Ibn Arabi is seemingly refuting that. He's actually taking the Shiite position on the Khilafah, right? And using that hadith that exists of all places in the Sahih Bukhari, that hadith, if there are two caliphs, kill one of them. That essentially he's basically, in a very elusive sort of way, invalidating the Khilafah of, we call the Nawasib, but where everybody else calls the Khulafa al-Rashidun. Take of it what you will. This has not been lost on Ibn Arabi's Shiite commentators, and it's also driven some of his Sunni commentators really, nutty in trying to explain this, what Ibn Arabi is talking about. Because it is very crypto-Shia in what he's doing here.
And also the explanation which gives it is, for me, quite deep explanation that the same way, in reality, there is only one God. The emanation, it's the tajalli, manifestation. If also on earth you have one who is the face of God.
Exactly. And that is the classic argument of the wilaya takwiniya of the Shia, the existential providential guidance of the Imams and the Ahl Bayt. Right there, what you just said.
Okay, and now the most annoying question. What is the reason? What do you think that Sheikh Muhyiddin is stating that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not appoint directly his successor when it is, how to speak, historical fact that it happened on Ghadir Hum before so many Sahaba, and it is quoted in so many narrations, Sunni
In
and
Bukhari,
Shia, and it
in
is.
the Sahih al-Bukhari itself, it occurs 5 times in 5 different narrations of the same incident. In the Sahih al-Bukhari, the very ultimate source text of all of these Sunnis. This is a question. The only logical conclusion that I have ever been able to reach about this statement by Ibn Arabi is that he is outright doing taqiyya. That this is outright taqiyya because there was so much suspicion that was being hurled at him, especially in his period, after he left the Maghreb and came through Egypt, and into the Levant and then Anatolia and then finally in Damascus, that there was a lot of suspicion about Ibn Arabi. And just remember, when this Fusus al-Hikam was written and the dream he had and everything was at the time when there was a pitched conflict still ongoing between the Muslim forces and these Crusader states. And so the Ayyubids, I think at the time that Ibn Arabi wrote this was now in the period well after Saladin. But even his successors, the successors of the Ayyubid successors of Saladin, were very sensitive politically to any sort of Shiite, whether Ismaili, Imami, Zaydi, or anything, in a given, because they looked at all of the Shia as a fifth column, because some of these Ismailis were dealing with these Crusaders and they were looked on by Saladin as being sort of a fifth column. So if Ibn Arabi was even saying something, if he didn't put this argument in, and then we went through the rest of the chapter, it is very easy to, if you take that one statement out of that chapter of David and read the rest of the chapter as is, it is a Shiite argument, especially given the sentence he puts in about the union of the Khilafah and the Imamah, right? That is outright in this day whether an Imami or an Ismaili doctrine of the Imamate. So my takeaway from this, the only conclusion I have been able to come to is that this is one of those incidents of outright taqiyya on his part, right? To just basically, and also so people who are really following his doctrine closely and want to understand will keep going in the in the flow of thought and what he's saying. Whereas those who are not that deep and are not that interested or not that committed to Ibn Arabi will just basically look at this and say, okay, well, right, he's not a Shiite. Just move on. That is the only way I have been able to resolve this. Because the commentators until our the Shiite commentators are not helpful at all on this passage. Yeah.
And the last one, when he speaks about the iron and the stone, that he says, okay, you can molten the iron with, for example, reproaching the person or giving guidance to him and so on. So his heart can be cured, but the stone, in some sense, it is a done deal. You cannot do anything with it. If you can comment in more detail
But
this point.
what more can be said than what you just said? An iron can be melted, can be crafted, can be, made into anything, a utensil, a weapon, a shield, all these kind, but the stone is incapable of being transformed unless it's crushed completely. And then it's completely useless if you crush stone, and that's just becomes dirt. So this is what I think Ibn Arabi is, the example he's trying to make here, in saying that. So and he puts this especially right after the poem, right? Where he's indicating that unless you truly grasp that the Amr Takwini is the real situation of things, and the Amr Taklifi is a derivative from the Amr Takwini. If you don't get this, then there's nothing to teach you about the greater picture. You will never get any of this, right? So this is why I think he is putting this at the very final part of the chapter. And just remember, the whole chapter is designed to discuss the very attribute of wujud itself. It's the hikmat al-wujudiyah, right? Fi kalamat al-wujudiyah. So this is what he's trying to indicate to us, I think, with this.
Okay, thank you very much,
You're
Sidi.
very welcome. Yeah. Anybody else? Say.
I can go because my thoughts were related to that very last passage too. I'll just share how I think about it, because I'm trying to understand, unpack what he's saying in this part. Is really interesting. Putting it all together, it sounds something like the softening. So the hardened hearts are softened, but then there's this talk about using them then to make armor out of them, and something may be protected against only by itself. And then he talks about, and then he has that, I seek refuge from you in you, and he's talking about vengeance. The way that I'm putting it together is that the amr taklifi it brings a kind of wrath with it, and that itself is what softens the hearts. But the purpose of softening the heart, this passage makes it sound like the purpose is to like not harden, but armor the heart against that same taklif, so that you can bear it more, you can bear it better.
Or that, and then there is even a deeper dimension to that once you fully realize that, then you are in the place to fully comprehend the nature of the Amr Takwini itself, and how the taklif is a derivative of the takwin.
Yeah, and maybe one of the ways in which maybe that is one of the ways in which that's the case, is that it's a mercy because it guards you against that accidental wrath. Like it's a mercy in that sense. I was thinking that it makes you a little bit more capable of dealing with, and I was wondering also if taklif could be broadened beyond just the taklif of the Sharia to just what we call like bala, like trials and
Sure.
tribulations in life,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that those trials can be seen as a kind of wrath that is actually a kind of mercy that helps you deal with
Yeah, I
more
mean,
tribulations.
100%. If we take the immediate Islamic context and legalistic context out of this, he is actually saying that. I mean, the taklif is just basic, very commonsensical self-protection, right? I mean, let's think of an example. You don't run into the street naked, right? Your donning of clothes, besides guarding you from the elements, is also, guarding you and safeguarding you for other things. Like you don't run into the middle of the street. You follow the street lights and everything, go, stop, go, etc. This is, in a nutshell, this is what it's trying to tell you, that the taklif, when we, kind of peel away all the acquiescence surrounding, that is what the nature of the taklif is. It's just a basic protection of you, right, on your path, right? So then that prayer that we have from the Prophet, Audu bika minka, it says, it takes refuge in God's mercy from God's wrath. So it is taking refuge here in God's takween from God's taklif. Because on the one hand, the takween is being very unequivocally corresponded to the nafas al-Rahmani and the Rahma Kulliya as a whole, whereas the taklif is being corresponded to the wrath and all the harsh elements that we associate with exotericism. So that is also happening in what he's saying. Yeah.
The word is just interesting. The word taklif in the Urdu, it has a connotation of like just like pain, just like bad things, stress.
Yeah.
Like I talked to my mother about this once, and she was just like, she didn't understand why prayer is taklif, because for her prayer is so nice. She likes doing it, but it does have that connotation in Urdu too, of just like pain or just trials.
Yeah. In Farsi, it does. I mean, in Farsi as well, because it's what derives from Arabic. But in Persian, the immediate association of the word taklif is just duty. But yeah, duty in the sense that you have to do it and you must do it, and if you don't do it, X, Y, and Z will happen, etc. Yeah.
I would have thought that it has more to do with safeguarding something important, like protection or responsibility to protect, a duty toward the truth, the sacred, the good, the divine, not just. I agree with what you said. I mean, you don't run out in the street naked and run out into traffic, but I mean, there are different levels of importance and priority. I think in this case, taklif, that the reason why I think, as Hussein was saying, that we can associate pain with the concept is because, well, the more responsibility you have, the more stressful it is on you and the more anguish. And so you could look at pain in that context as being anxiety related to the importance of your responsibility or
But look what he says at the poem. It's good that you brought this up. He's saying in the poem, whoever understands is witness to what we say, but he who does not is assailed by anxiety. So if you don't understand the nature of this, the true root of this taklif, of this duty, is in the takween, is in the existential level of the divine will, which produces everything that you can possibly imagine, all contraries, sameness, everything comes out of the divine will. He says, if you don't understand this, when you don't understand this, is when you are assailed by this anxiety and you're trying to constantly, navigate through the choppy waters of life. What Ibn Arabi is saying here is that once you understand the root of this, then you can go about your business and, be, in a traditional Muslim society of the kind that he was living in, you can be what you are, but also understand what you are understanding on the deeper level about where all of this is emerging from. Where there is no contradiction then, even though it may appear so on one level, but there's no contradiction between the outward and the inner. This particular argument, I also look at as sort of a adumbration of what he said in the first chapter about making, the Lord your safeguard in the outer and then in the inner, what he said in the chapter of Adam. So this is kind of a augmentation of what he's been kind of pushing from the first chapter about this. But at the same time, he's trying to show us that where the root of everything lies, where this is. So not to confuse the outward instantiation of an act or a taklif or a duty with its inner existential root, which is way beyond all of this and beyond all duality and the creator of all duality and all of it, right? Such that he's also then, kind of telling these sticklers that, no matter what you think about obedience and disobedience, ultimately the disobedience itself is also what is emerging from the divine will. And it's part of being. So get it, if you don't get it, then that's your problem. And at the same time, it is a very subtle criticism and very valid criticism of the kind of dualism that this, exoterically fixated approach to religion and law continually instills in people. That and I've seen this in clientele as well, where especially people who have come out of like very hardcore evangelical or fundamentals or very cult-like kind of communities, they are split in their mind about the good and the bad, right? There is no flow or continuity between these things, right? Which this kind of perspective is trying to instill in that very sharp exoteric worldview. These people become they start to develop split personalities because they're constantly trying to either conceal something, maybe a certain view or action is deemed as shameful by their communities, and on and on and on this goes. And what this does to the human psyche is it inflicting sickness upon it, right? Whereas this kind of perspective is opening the human subject up to see the continuity in things between the exoteric and the esoteric and understand where the root of the exoteric actually lies. And just remember, what he's saying here is important from this perspective is because one of the principles that he established from the very first chapter, and then he continues again and again, kind of telling us, is that the name, the hidden, al-batin, is the prior principle. And the zahir is what emerges from the hidden, the manifest, right? And so if this is the case, then the principle, the leading principle of things is the batin. And so in this case, we're talking about the amr takwini, the existential element of this, rather than the taklifi, the duty obligating form of it.
Yes, thank you. That leads to a couple other comments, just quickly, if I may. First of all, if you see two vicegerents, kill one of them. Kill someone. Just kill one of them. It doesn't matter. Pick one. That reminds me of the Buddhist saying that if you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him.
Kill him. Yeah.
It's the same to me. It's the same advice.
It's the same. It's an iteration of the same thing, where the wali or the khalafa stands for the Buddha with Ibn Arabi in this.
Yeah,
chapter.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a good, great observation. Yeah.
And also, I wanted to mention about the iron, the softening of the hearts, and the softening of the iron, only to turn around and make it into armor. It reminds me of just the concept of there was a TV show on the air here a while ago. I forget what it was called, but it was a contest, like a reality show where guys had to make knives and swords and stuff, and whoever made the best sword, won the show and won the prize. And the whole concept was how to temper steel, how to make a weapon or a piece of armor, and how you have to first, soften everything, melt it down, liquefy everything, only to put it into a different form and then temper it and make the armor or the weapon out of it. And I guess to me, that's what I'm seeing with the softening of the heart. Now, normally you think of, bitterness, hatred, all that stuff, and you want to dissolve that stuff. But there could be the other element too, where that you might be too focused on like the exoteric side of things, and that could be part of the softening of the heart, is like kind of killing the Buddha so that you can, kind of fashion a new set, fashion some armor in your spiritual battle, because as long as you're focused on finding the Buddha in the road, then you're spiritually pretty weak and you're not going to be doing too well in any battles. So
Boom.
That's all I wanted to say.
That is right, bullseye, right in the middle. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right, thank you.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I have a question if I'll be
Go for it.
permitted to ask it.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a meta question. So you have disagreements with Ibn Arabi, but he's got such a comprehensive philosophy. So I feel like if you're taking this guy seriously, then you're taking his views seriously, and it's going to change how you view yourself. It's going to change how you view the world. It's very like the existential ramifications are just huge if you're taking this guy seriously. So how can you take his views seriously yet disagree with him on these points? And how do you draw that line?
I mean, I think there's a fallacy that the men and women of the path necessarily have to agree with every last detail of what each other are doing. I absolutely adore Ibn Arabi, but I disagree with some of his takes on certain things, and these are outward. That doesn't mean, that I like, there are certain Shia that just drive me crazy where he's, he said this, we cannot, this is nonsense. We don't want to deal with Ibn Arabi ever again. I don't look at things that way. People can get the details of something wrong and get the principle of something 100% on target. And I think that Ibn Arabi is this way. His ontology, which is his real crown, is boom, on target on everything. He ticks every single box. But the details and even the train of reasoning that he uses to get there can often be times wrong. So what? So we can disagree with how he reaches his conclusion while agreeing with the conclusion he reaches, and also celebrate the man at the same time for being the absolute genius as he was. I think some of the other approaches that you see amongst the non-critical audience, where they gush over absolutely everything Ibn Arabi says and don't want to contradict him on anything, is actually contrary to what even Ibn Arabi himself tells his disciples to be like. He's constantly telling his disciples, and whether in the Fusus or in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, do not be a muqallid, do not be an emulator, right? You have to also come to your own tasting and your own shuhud, your own witnessing of what I am telling you, right? This is how I have experienced it. Now it's up to you to experience it on your own. And because there is constant recreation and no single moment is the same, and we never step into the same river twice, it is impossible by Ibn Arabi's own axiom for my experience of Wahdat al-Wujud to be exactly the same as his experience of Wahdat al-Wujud. So therefore, we can disagree on the outward details of our arrival at Wahdat al-Wujud, while we can be on 100% on the same page about it. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Are we done? All right. If there's no other questions, let's start. Okay,
If you
Heather.
allow me,
Sure,
last one,
absolutely. Go for it.
Sidi.
Absolutely. Go.
So, when he is comparing the alim who is mujtahid with the prophet, and per
Whoop. You froze. That's frozen. Hassan, you froze. You just froze. there.
Okay, I'll repeat
Yeah.
it. So when you have the mujtahid, who is the same time the arif and the gnostic, we can approach him on two levels. On exoteric level, when you see at him, he's following the prophet.
Yeah.
But in the esoteric level, he's directly taking his knowledge from God without intermediary. If you can link it, one of your comments on Facebook, when you mentioned about, for example, the Imam Hassan ala dhikrihi salam from this milis, when he said that Qiyamah happened.
Mhm.
But in the esoteric level, the one who is deriving directly from God, for him, Qiyamah already happened. But for one who is looking at the Sharia ruling without understanding their direct source, he is the one who is waiting for him that Qiyamah to happen. If you
Yes.
can give some more comment.
Oh, Jesus, Hassan, ask an easy one. This is let's leave this for the time being, because let me tell you why. Because we're building up to this very point that you want to raise. In the chapters of Moses and Muhammad, this will become a very, very especially important point. So if it's okay with you, remember, bracket this and let us come back to this very point when we start on the chapters of Moses and then go into Muhammad. Because the question that you raise here is very central to those two chapters. Okay? Is that all right?
Yes, it is all right.
Okay, so bracket it, please. Write it down, and let's remember once we start to get into those two final chapters. Okay. Otherwise, if there are no other questions,
There's just one point.
sure,
This is probably a longer conversation. I mean, it's one
Okay.
that we've been having, I think, for weeks.
Sure.
But I just want to flag this here.
no problem.
It seems like he seems to revert to this deterministic position again in this
I know.
chapter.
He does. Yeah.
And I can't reconcile this with
Yeah.
voluntarism that we talked
Yeah.
about this in the past. I mean, it's just, I don't know what to do with it.
You're not alone. What to do with it. This has also been criticized by a variety of his own, followers. Said Faraqani, because he was asked this many times by his own disciples, has some interesting things to say about that. But yeah, this is one of the traps with Ibn Arabi, is that the voluntarism, the kind of the borders between determinism and voluntarism are either blurred or usually fall one within the other, and usually into determinism, rather than the voluntarism. And that's where things get a little bit murky with Ibn Arabi, where then the whole universe starts to look like a mechanical thing, and the will of God and all of it. This was the issue more than anything that raised all the flags of al-Ahsa'i. And in his various attacks and critiques of Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra, this is his kind of entry point where he goes after these two for that very reason. My thing is that it is possible to read, or rather, it is possible to bracket this determinism of Ibn Arabi on one level, and kind of look at it as not so much a flaw, but more of a how should one put it? Not so much as a flaw, but more as a kind of a perspective on the will itself, the phase al-Aqdas, and how it operates, right? Because on another level, he is also saying that this level of the divine will and the most holy effusion is producing everything in all contraries, and contraries are not some things that can be determined, right? And so if there is an indeterminacy to what the will is producing out of itself endlessly, then we cannot, by definition, at least from a logical point of view, fall into a determinism about how all the rest of this from the levels below are operating. So I take your point. This is one of the enigmas to Ibn Arabi, and it's one that, in my opinion, even his commentators haven't been able to adequately resolve, at least to my satisfaction. But it is one of the points it is one of the entry points that the Shaykhi school has always used to try to nail Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra on this particular question, because it's making God sound like a very predictable machine. You know, that you can predict what it's going to do by virtue of X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that this is completely what Ibn Arabi is trying to drive at either.
Yeah, from what I remember of what Sheikh Ahmed says about this, he has like this ingenious resolution to the whole problem, which, I mean, I still have a lot of questions about his solution too. But I remember somewhere in Chittick's book on Ibn Arabi, he concludes a section on discussing this determinism and freedom thing by saying, ultimately, you have to have a mystical experience to understand it, which I just always find is so unsatisfying. Whereas like someone like Sheikh Ahmed just very logically lays it out.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I need something like that.
Yeah. Sheikh Ahmed, on that respect, I mean, he really did resolve this problem of the determinism and the voluntarism. But by the same token, as you keep reading him, you see that he starts ending up in a very similar ontological plane as Ibn Arabi, but in a kind of from a very different starting point. You know, what he says, for example, about the maqam al-bayan, you know, as being as being synonymous with fu'ad and wujud, and the place of the sending forth, he calls it, is precisely what Ibn Arabi is talking about, nafas al-rahmaniyya, and the divine will. So, contrary to popular opinion, the ontology of the Shaykhi school is not dualistic in the way that certain people have attributed to it. Qurban gets it right, in my opinion, in the way that he reads Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai. He's right about that. And so what we get with al-Ahsai, even given his attacks and polemics against Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra, is that he himself then ends up in a very similar place as the two, but with one silver lining. And the silver lining with al-Ahsai and his school is that the ontology is not deterministic in the way that Ibn Arabi is. You cannot predict what God is going to do with al-Ahsai. Whereas with the Akbarian school, to some extent, and to some extent Mullah Sadra, given these axioms and principles that they're putting down, the objection is that you're making God completely predictable and deterministic. I mean, where's the mystery here then? If that's the way that God is going to behave. But the Shaykhi school resolves this beautifully, well, ending up in the same place at the end.
And then that's because of his integration of the al-Bada, I'm guessing.
That is the al-Bada, beyond some of the objections that its opponents usually raise about it, but fundamentally, one of the importance of this point of al-Bada, which we find from the very first book of Kulaini, the sixth Imam alayhi salam talks about this. The Bada is outright an acknowledgement as an axiom that God can do whatever it wants at any time and can change anything at any time, including the trajectory of the will of something, right? Which then makes which, then gives us this indeterminacy and this voluntarism in a very, very interesting way, where God is present at all times and everything, its presence is always around. But at the same time, you cannot then kind of predict where something, if something starts at point A, which point it's going to end, because the divine hand is operative in that. So it can at any point change the trajectory of this thing and take it somewhere else, which then shows the power of God to do whatever it wills at any time in anything. With Ibn Arabi and the Akbarian's formula, etc., that is not present. Right? The way that they're laying out all of this, it makes God extremely predictable. So in one sense, you're 100% correct that what Shidduch is saying is sort of a cop-out, from having to explain this. But by the same token, I think the final assessment of this is that philosophical systems and explanations and adalad, the proofs of something are all occurring within language. So on another level, until you do have a fat experience, some kind of a mystical experience, or really deeply intellect about these things, until you reach that plane yourself, whatever we say or write about these things ultimately is off the mark as well. You have to experience it. So what Ibn Arabi is trying to do, as well as what Sheikh Ahmed Asari is trying to do, is to get the people who are reading them, leading them to try to have that experience themselves, rather than just to rely on what these people are intellecting about this particular issue within the context and the axioms that they're putting it in, framing the whole question in. Because this is not just an intellectual exercise. It's not just the Wittgensteinian language game. All of this is meant as kind of to create a preparedness for you to experience that which they're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Anyone else? Okay. Let's start then on the chapter of Jonah, and the zikr associated with that is the zikr of Yah Nafisu, and we'll meet back again, like always, next week, same time. So until then, everybody have a good week. Yah Wujudu.